And finally, The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe.
You were supposed to tell them that this is one of my very greatest stories.
Of course. Sorry? This is one of Poe's greatest stories. So famous that it's even been done on an episode of The Simpsons.
Okay, thank you. The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe.
True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous. I have been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell on me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. Every night, at about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening, so far that I could see him as he lay in his bed. Ha ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray of light fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by his name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have had to be a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph to think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers. So I knew he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on, steadily, steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the fastening.
Who's there?
I kept quite still, and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in all this time I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watch beetles in the wall. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it welled up in my own bosom, deepening, and with its dreadful echo, the terrors that distracted me. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, his fears gradually growing upon him, trying to fancy them causeless.
It's nothing but the wind in the chimney. It's only a mouse crossing the floor. It's merely a cricket which has made a single chirp.
When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple, dim ray shot from out the crevice like the thread of a spider and fell full upon his vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled me to the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. Have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is the over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watchmaid's when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier to courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. Meanwhile, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mock me? I have told you that I am nervous, and so I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. And now, a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I leaped into the room. He shrieked once and once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled a heavy bed over him. I smiled gaily at the deed, find it so far accomplished. For many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound, but at length it ceased. The old man was dead. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the body, cutting off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out. No stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I was too wary for that. A tub had caught it all. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, and still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking on the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 2 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity.
Good morning, sir. We don't wish to alarm you, but we're police officers.
One of your neighbours has reported hearing a shriek during the night coming from this building, arousing suspicion of foul play.
We've been authorised to search the premises, if you'd be so good as to cooperate with our investigations.
I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bowed the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all round the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure and undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and bade them have a rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definition until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt, I grew very pale. But I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased. And what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by their observations, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I raved, I swore, I swung the chair on which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, louder, louder. and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it impossible? They heard not? Almighty God, no! They heard! They suspected! They knew! They were making a mockery of my horror. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear their hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, louder, 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 louder. Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Take up the planks. Here is the beating of his hideous heart.